Hi, you're at Real Turkey channel, and I'm Atilla Yesilada, reaching out to you from a sunny Istanbul day in my home, which also serves as a makeshift studio. Wow, what a week it has been! 2 days ago, Moody's cut US credit rating. Wow! It wasn't unexpected, but please refer to my previous videos where I talked about the possibility of a global financial crisis. Moody's cut American credit rating because of the budget deficits and the absence of any prospect for cutting those deficits. I have already talked about that. Today I'm going to talk about the Turkish economy and the prospects for a sudden stop. A sudden stop means economy very abruptly falling off the cliff. Economic activity coming to a near standstill in a month or so. Is that really likely? What has brought about this discussion, which is raging among Turkish economists? I don't know how widely it's discussed in the international financial press. I haven't really found any references. Let's start with an assessment of the current conditions in Turkish economy, then look at the sudden stop debate, and I will list a couple of scenarios where this is a possibility. While I'm mindful of a sudden stop syndrome, I am more mindful of stagflation, which is either a decline in economic activity coupled with high or rising inflation, or very slow economic growth accompanied by rapidly rising inflation. If we look at the current indicators, obviously real data or hard data is yet to arrive. We see a structural shift after 19th of March when the presidential candidate of the main opposition party, Mr. Ekrem İmamoğlu, who also was or still is the mayor of Istanbul, was arrested on charges of corruption and abetting the terror organization PKK. He is still in prison. I think there is little doubt among dissident experts like me that these charges are completely frivolous and he is only in prison because in all the polls he beats Erdogan hands down in the next presidential race. So this was a below-the-belt punch to eliminate a rival likely to beat you in the next presidential elections. This created a huge confidence shock. Foreign investors immediately dumped their Turkey positions. They never trusted Erdogan with rational policies. And suddenly this event, it is really for a country that pretends to be democratic and still holds competitive elections, is a major disaster. There is another small party called Victory Party, which is anti-immigrant and nationalist. Its chairman is also in prison, which by itself is a shameful, disgraceful act in any democracy. But it didn't really raise too many eyebrows because the party is too small. But according to current polls, CHP is at least 3 percentage points ahead of AKP, and it has swept the local elections, which were held on 31st of March 2025. So this was a major event. As I've said, foreign investors dumped their positions. Turkish savers immediately switched from Turkish lira assets to safe haven hard currency deposits. We have seen a meltdown in central bank reserves, which have roughly declined $50 billion in a month. Given that before the event, central bank reserves were $160 billion, you can imagine what a loss of $50 billion would do. It has also started a slowdown in Turkish economy, the extent of which we're still assessing. The PMI indicators are flat at the recessionary level, that is 47.5 or below 50. Consumer confidence is down. Credit growth is slowing down. But all of these are soft data. We really don't have any data from April or May yet that will confirm that the economy is on the verge of a sudden stop. Nonetheless, this debate is not academic. Neither is it spectacular or too far off the way, simply because seeing how its reserves melted, the central bank raised interest rates by 500 basis points, which in any economy would slow down economic activity. Now, in a few weeks, we'll start seeing hard data from April and May, which will tell us the extent of the economic slowdown. I don't think it will show a sudden stop syndrome. It will probably show a moderate decline in the pace of economic activity and a rise in inflation. In other words, Turkey's inflation, which is currently at 37% per annum, would stop declining. And economic activity, which is running at a pace of 3.5% to 4%, could decline to as low as 2%. This is the stagflation scenario I'm talking about. But some credit must be given to those who advocate or fear sudden stop, because there are more shocks that may be underway. The most likely shock is the one I mentioned in my previous videos, a global financial panic attack, which would prevent Turkish banks and corporates from borrowing abroad. Turkey needs to roll over or borrow $200 to $210 billion per year to make ends meet. Now, obviously, banks and corporates anywhere in the world don't pay off their maturing debt. They roll it over. And depending on economic conditions, they either borrow fresh money or pay off part of their debts because their balance sheets don't require more leverage. I'm talking about a scenario where developments in the American economy, mostly related to the budget deficit and the accumulation of public debt, but also potentially related to Trump's Mar-a-Lago plan, sudden depreciation of the dollar, raising American interest rates, leading to a credit crunch. This is an exogenous shock to the Turkish economy. A lot of banks and corporates will not be able to completely roll over their maturing debts, so they will have to rely on their FX assets or borrow from the central bank, which would lead to a capital exodus from the Turkish economy. Financial conditions will tighten and economic activity will slow down. Clearly, even though I fear a global financial crisis or panic attack, it's impossible to assess its magnitude or duration. It could be severe enough to stop the Turkish economy in its tracks. Another risk, which to me is more likely or easier to assess and monitor, is another political shock similar to the arrest of Ekrem İmamoğlu. Erdogan claims that CHP as a party is seeped in illegal practices and graft and is in cahoots with terror organizations. It's quite possible that the party leadership will be sacked and an AKP-appointed trustee will be tasked with running the party. That would cause a shock similar to Ekrem İmamoğlu arrest. There are also several lawsuits against the chairman of CHP, Mr. Ozgur Özel, who cannot be prosecuted because he is also a member of the parliament and thus enjoys immunity. But since AKP and its ally MHP have a majority in the Grand Assembly, they can easily bring his immunity to a floor vote, which may be lifted and he may be arrested. So, any more frontal assaults on CHP would cause political shocks. As I've said, there isn't really that much foreign financial capital left in the country. As I broadcast this video, it's coming back because the central bank raised interest rates. That money will go out, which will modestly tighten financial conditions. But the major impact will be on the confidence of Turkish savers or investors on the stability of Turkish lira assets. We will see another exodus from Turkish lira assets to FX deposit holdings. This is not the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is the political tensions in Turkey are rising even higher, with streets boiling in unrest, possibly in violence, in response to the arrest of CHP leaders or leading members. This is the kind of chaos that always scares Turks. We are relatively peaceful people who are not used to violence or, clashes on the streets. And the response may be rich Turks engaging in capital flight that's taking their money out of the Turkish financial system and sending it to abroad, for instance, to Switzerland. And the remaining domestics taking their money out of banks, either to invest into spot gold or, as the Turkish phrase goes, to put it under their mattresses. That is really, keeping it as cash just in case things go wrong. Now that will create a sudden stop simply because the financial system will shrink rapidly. The central bank may be forced to raise interest rates even further to stabilize the Turkish lira. And really, given that we see anecdotal evidence of rising stress in the business community, it will trigger a spate of bankruptcies or bankruptcy protection filings. Then, of course, workers will be laid off. They will not be able to consume, and Turkey will suddenly experience recession. Honestly, I don't want to market that as my most likely scenario. There are a lot of dynamics at play here. If you watch my previous video, you will see that Turkey's nemesis, the Kurdish separatist terror organization, PKK, has stopped armed struggle against the Turkish state. It's laying down its arms and dissolving into the mountains of Iraq or Iran. Doesn't make a difference. PKK's vow to stop armed struggle against the Turkish state is not an end, but it's a means to writing a new constitution which would address the root cause of terror in Turkey, which is institutionalized discrimination against the ethnic Kurdish minority and their treatment as a second-class citizen. Sort of like the conditions blacks suffered before the Civil Rights Act in the United States. So there is also a good case scenario because drafting a new constitution requires a much higher majority in the Grand Assembly that AKP and MHP currently have. They will not only need to draft the pro-Kurdish DEM party to their aid, but also elicit the cooperation of CHP. So it is possible, though that's not my most likely scenario, that the current attacks and pressure on CHP will give way to peace and all the parties cooperating on writing a new constitution. Why don't I think this is the most likely scenario? Simply because Erdogan and his sidekick, Mr. Bahçeli, have built their reign on absolute control over all the branches of the state. That's the parliament, the judiciary, and of course, executive having exorbitant privileges. A new constitution that would be considered fair by secularists who are represented by CHP and Kurds, mostly represented by DEM party, would mean Erdogan and Bahçeli devolving a lot of their powers to the judiciary, to the parliament, and to local authorities. I don't think they are ready to do that, and to be perfectly fair, if they do so, if Turkey ever becomes a freer society, Erdogan's abuses, mistreatment of the opposition, the crony regime, the connections between MHP and mafia will all be, aired out to the public, and Erdogan and Bahçeli will probably lose the next election. At the end, to be as objective as possible, I don't think the worst case or the best case scenarios, whether at home or abroad, will take place. We will muddle through. In the terms of Turkish economy, this means stagflation. That's very low growth and inflation declining. But look, our forecast for year-end CPI is 30% from the current 37%. So what? Once inflation is over 5%, it is high inflation. It eats up your disposable incomes. And moreover, given the current policy settings, i.e. the monetary and fiscal policy settings, 30% is the best we're going to achieve. 2026 is not going to be any better. So really, this is probably as good as it gets for the Turkish economy. Unless we have a major breakthrough in this constitutional talks and the best case scenario transpires, Turkish economy will be stuck at a very low growth path, accompanied by fairly high inflation, and somehow not resilient, fragile to exogenous shocks like those created by Trump. I haven't really done Turkish economy for a long time, so this was the opportunity. I want to thank all of you for watching Real Turkey channel videos. I would appreciate if you follow or click the bell button or whatever the hell it is. I don't know, but every content creator says these things. It's more important to me that you share your views and comments with me, which I enjoy very much, and share the video with other Turkey enthusiasts if you have enjoyed it. Have a good week.